My parents demanded that I get married to keep the family business, so I chose a country girl to spite them. I'll be honest, I'm not proud of how everything started. What I did in the beginning wasn't about love or even respect. It was about revenge. I wasn't thinking about the future or anyone's feelings. I only wanted to make a point. All my life, I had lived exactly the way I wanted. No rules, no limits. I enjoyed parties, fast cars, luxury vacations, and all the fun that money could buy. My family was wealthy, and I never had to worry about much. My father owned a large business empire, and I always assumed I would take over one day. That was the plan, or so I thought. Everything changed one evening when my parents called me in for a serious talk. It felt different from our usual arguments. There was a heavy silence in the room before my father finally spoke. He sat across from me, leaning forward in a way that reminded me of how he handled business deals. "Your mother and I feel it's time for you to settle down," he said. At first, I didn't take it seriously. Settle down? That wasn't me. I thought they were joking, but they weren't. My father explained that if I wanted to take over the company, I had to prove I was responsible. And to them, responsibility meant marriage. They said I was almost 30 and couldn't be trusted to run the business if I continued living like I had been. My mother added that my father had spent his whole life building the business, and they couldn't hand it over to someone who still acted like a reckless teenager. I was shocked and angry. I felt like they were trying to control me, like they didn't trust me after everything I had done to prepare for the business in my own way. I didn't want to be told how to live my life, especially not when it came to something as personal as marriage. But then I had an idea. If they wanted me to marry, I would marry. But I would do it on my terms. I would choose someone they would never expect, someone who didn't fit into their high society world. Maybe then they would see how ridiculous their demands were. That's when I met Mary. Mary was different from anyone I had ever known. I didn't find her at a party or a fancy event. Instead, I saw her at a quiet charity event that my friend had forced me to attend. She was helping organize things, not trying to get attention or show off. She wore a simple dress, and her hair was tied back neatly. She didn't wear any expensive jewelry or designer clothes. She looked plain, calm, and most of all was real. She didn't try to impress anyone. When I walked up and introduced myself, she just nodded and said, "Nice to meet you, Alex." She didn't stare or ask me about my car or my watch like others often did. In fact, she barely looked at me. It was almost like she didn't care who I was. That caught my attention. I asked her where she was from, trying to learn more about her. She told me she came from a small town and that her life was nothing fancy. Her voice was soft, and there was something quiet and careful in her eyes. She was the opposite of every girl my parents had hoped I would marry. That made her perfect for my plan, at least. I decided to make my move. I told her I was looking for someone to marry. Yes, I said it directly. I didn't try to hide it. I explained that I had my reasons, though I didn't go into the full story. I also told her that she would have to pass a few tests if she wanted to be my wife. Looking back now, I realize how strange that must have sounded. Who says that? To someone they just met? But I was still stuck in my plan, still trying to prove something to my parents. I didn't care how it sounded or how it made Mary feel. I just wanted to go through with it. To my surprise, Mary didn't get angry. She didn't walk away or call me crazy. Instead, she looked at me for a moment with an expression I couldn't read. Then she laughed, softly, but with a spark in her eyes that caught me off guard. There was something in her gaze that I didn't understand at the time, something powerful. It was like she knew more than she was letting on. "Well, isn't that funny?" she said. There was something about the way she said it that made me pause. It was almost like she was amused, not confused or upset, but curious. I had thought I was the one in control, but in that moment I wasn't so sure anymore. At the time, I didn't know who Mary really was. I thought she was just a simple country girl, someone who lived a quiet life and wouldn't cause any problems. But I was wrong. Mary was hiding something. She wasn't the person I thought she was. There was more to her than her modest clothes or soft voice. Behind that calm face, she carried a secret, one that would change everything I thought I knew about her and about myself. Mary didn't even blink when I asked her about marriage. She looked at me carefully for a moment, like she was trying to decide if I was serious. I had expected her to say no, or at least laugh it off, but instead she surprised me. She calmly said that she had been thinking she could use a little marriage herself. Her words weren't full of emotion or excitement. They were simply stated, almost as if she had been waiting for something like this. I hadn't seen that coming. I asked her if she was serious, and after studying me for a second, she nodded and said yes, but under one condition. I had to promise. that I wouldn't ask her anything about her past. She wanted to keep things simple. As far as everyone else needed to know, she was just a quiet girl from a small town. That's the story we would tell, nothing more. She asked me if I was fine with that. Without hesitation, I agreed. In fact, I was thrilled. I couldn't believe my luck. She was perfect for what I needed. Someone completely different from the women my parents wanted me to marry. Someone who would confuse and frustrate them. Someone who wouldn't fit in with the expensive, high-class world they lived in. The day I introduced Mary to my parents was one I would never forget. My mother's reaction was instant. Her expression changed the moment she laid eyes on Mary. She noticed the plain dress first, and then the way Mary stood so calmly, without trying to charm or impress anyone. My mother gave her a tight smile, clearly trying to hide her shock and disappointment. My father's response was even more obvious. His face fell into a deep frown, and he didn't even try to hide it. They didn't need to say much. I already knew what they were thinking. Mary wasn't what they had imagined. She wasn't stylish, glamorous, or talkative. She wasn't from a known family or a wealthy background. To them, she was a nobody, but that was exactly why I had chosen her. I reminded them that they had asked me to settle down. I told them that Mary was everything I needed. She was calm, grounded, and didn't care about money or luxury. I smiled as I said it, knowing it would make them even more uncomfortable. Mary played her part so well. She was always polite and soft-spoken. She answered their questions with short, thoughtful replies and always appeared just a little unsure of how to behave in their fancy world. She never challenged them or tried to show off. My parents kept giving each other worried looks every time she opened her mouth. They didn't know what to make of her, and I enjoyed every moment of it. But over time, I started noticing something else. Something I hadn't seen at first. There was something hidden behind Mary's quiet smile. Every now and then, I would catch a certain look in her eyes, one I couldn't quite understand. It wasn't fear or confusion. It was something else, something almost amused. One night, after dinner with my parents, she asked me if I was really sure I wanted to go through with this. She looked straight at me, and for a second I thought she was serious. But I laughed and told her yes, this was going better than I had hoped. My parents were horrified, and that meant the plan was working. She nodded and said she was glad she could help. But her voice was softer than usual, almost too soft. I didn't think much of it at the time. I was still so focused on how my parents were reacting that I didn't stop to really look at Mary. I didn't ask myself why she was so willing to go along with this. I just assumed she was doing it for reasons similar to mine, maybe money, maybe the chance to escape something. I never asked. I had promised not to. Eventually, the night of the charity ball arrived. It was one of the biggest events of the year, hosted by my parents and attended by the city's elite. They had spared no expense. The hall was huge and covered in glittering chandeliers. The tables were wrapped in white silk cloths, and the silverware looked like it cost more than most people's monthly salary. Every guest was dressed in designer gowns or sharp black suits. Mary and I arrived together. She wore another simple dress, nothing fancy. She didn't try to stand out. In fact, next to all the shiny dresses and bright jewelry, she looked completely out of place, exactly how I wanted her to look. Her quiet presence was enough to unsettle the crowd without her even saying a word. Before we entered, I leaned down and reminded her that tonight was the final test. She gave me a quick nod and said she understood. Her expression didn't give anything away. She looked calm, as always. As the night went on, I watched her carefully. She smiled when people greeted her, said thank you when someone offered her a drink, and stayed close to me without drawing any attention. She didn't try to impress anyone. She didn't try to fit in, and my parents kept watching her from a distance, exchanging quiet whispers with concerned looks. I could almost see them trying to figure out how to stop this marriage without creating a scene. But then, something completely unexpected happened. Just as I was starting to feel comfortable with how things were going at the charity ball, something happened that completely turned the evening on its head. We had been standing near one of the decorated tables when a man's voice called out, full of excitement and warmth. I turned to look, and my heart almost stopped. It was the mayor. Not just any city official, but someone well-respected and known by everyone in the room. And he wasn't looking at me. He was looking straight at Mary. He stepped forward with a bright smile, reaching out to shake her hand. With genuine delight, "Mary, I'm delighted to see you here," he said, his voice loud enough to catch the attention of people nearby. All around us, heads turned. My parents were standing close by, and the shock on their faces was impossible to miss. My mother's jaw dropped, and my father looked completely frozen. As for me, I just stared in disbelief. The mayor knew Mary? This same Mary? The quiet, humble girl I had chosen on purpose to upset my parents? Mary didn't seem comfortable. She smiled back at the mayor politely, but there was something stiff in her posture, something guarded in her expression. "Good to see you too, Mayor," she replied, her voice steady but not warm. The mayor continued speaking, clearly excited to run into her. He began talking about a children's hospital project that Mary's family had funded years ago. He said people were still grateful for the work she and her family had done, and how their contributions continued to change lives. He spoke like she was someone important, someone well-known and respected in high society. Mary nodded in response. She didn't say much. She simply replied that her family only wanted to help where they could. There was humility in her words, but I could sense that she wanted the conversation to end. Thankfully, the mayor eventually moved on, leaving us standing in silence, surrounded by curious glances and confused faces. The silence didn't last long. My mother turned toward me, her face pale with disbelief. "Alex, what was that about?" she asked in a low voice, almost afraid to know the answer. Before I could respond, another familiar face appeared. It was Jack, an old family friend who had known me since I was a child. He walked up with a stunned expression, looking from me to Mary and then back again. "Mary," he said, clearly surprised. "It's been ages. I didn't know you were back in town." Mary gave a small, nervous laugh and nodded. She replied that she hadn't exactly told anyone she was returning, and that she had only come back for her wedding. Jack turned to me, his eyebrows raised in disbelief and amusement. "Alex," he said slowly, "you're marrying Mary? Mary, the charity princess?" He shook his head, still trying to process it. "Her family's one of the biggest philanthropists in the state." At that moment, I felt like the floor had been pulled out from under me. Charity Princess. The name wasn't unfamiliar. I had heard it before many times in conversations I never paid attention to. It was the kind of nickname people used for someone born into a wealthy family known for their generous donations and public kindness. Everyone in our social circles had heard of her. I just never connected the name to the woman I had brought to the ball. I had never looked her up, never bothered to learn her last name, never cared to ask questions. I thought she was just a regular girl from a quiet town. That's what she had told me, and I had believed it without a second thought. The moment we could break away from the crowd and escape my parents' questioning looks, I pulled Mary aside. We found a quiet corner, away from the music and the conversations. I turned to her, still shocked and trying to make sense of everything. "So," I said, keeping my voice low, "Charity Princess?" Mary looked away for a second, then gave a soft sigh. She didn't seem surprised that I had found out. She admitted it. Her family ran the largest charity fund in the state. They were deeply connected to the same world my parents were part of. The elite, the influential, the powerful. But she explained that she didn't live like that. She had spent years staying away from the spotlight. She had no interest in being part of high society. While her family attended galas, ran fundraisers, and appeared in magazines, she had chosen a simpler life. She had been volunteering quietly and keeping her distance from the world she had grown up in. I listened, still trying to understand how I had missed something so big. I asked her why she had never told me. Why hide something like that from someone she was about to marry, even if the marriage was just for show? She replied that her reasons weren't so different from mine. She reminded me that I hadn't been honest either, that I had approached her with a fake marriage plan to get back at my parents. She had seen through it all from the very beginning. She knew I didn't truly want a wife, just a partner in a plan to shake up my family, and that was exactly why she had agreed. She said she had been tired too. Tired of her parents choosing everything for her, tired of being told what kind of man she should marry, what kind of life she should live. She wanted to break free from expectations, from the endless pressure to fit a mold she never chose. So when I came along with my own rebellion, she saw an opportunity, a way to help me while also escaping her own trap. In that moment, the truth became clear. She hadn't been fooled by me. In fact, she had seen me clearly, maybe even more clearly than I had seen her. She understood why I had chosen her, and she had chosen me for the very same reason. We were both running away, hiding behind fake plans, trying to teach our parents a lesson while never realizing how alike we really were. I looked at her again, really looked this time. Not as a stranger I had used to get back at my parents, not as a simple girl from the countryside, but as someone who had her own story, her own pain, and her own strength. And in that moment, everything began to change. Mary's quiet response echoed in my mind. Guess that's one thing we have in common. It was a simple sentence, but it carried weight. I looked at her. Really looked at her, and for the first time, I saw her differently. Not as the girl I had picked out of spite. Not as the quiet outsider I had chosen to shock my parents. She wasn't a naive country girl who had stumbled into high society by accident. No, she had chosen this path with purpose, and she had done it on her own terms. I had underestimated her. Up until that moment, I thought I had been the one in control. I thought the plan was all mine. I was going to teach my parents a lesson by bringing someone into their world who didn't belong. Someone who didn't dress the part, didn't speak their language, and didn't care about their standards. But Mary had played along without hesitation, and now I knew why. She wasn't running from nothing. She was running from a world just like mine, and she had walked away from wealth, influence, and expectations not to hide, but to find herself. All I had done was try to be rebellious. She had done something much harder. She had taken real risks for her freedom. In comparison, my actions felt childish. I had gone looking for someone who would frustrate my parents. But what I found was someone who could stand tall without needing anyone's approval. While I'd been spending my time trying to prove a point through games and lies, she had been surviving quietly, with grace and determination. She didn't just put up with things, she chose how to live, even if it meant turning her back on an entire lifestyle built for her comfort, and she never complained. One evening, we were sitting in the living room, going through some charity event plans. These were the same events my mother had insisted we attend together now that we were engaged. My mother believed these events would show society we were the perfect couple, her way of saving face. Mary never said much during these planning sessions. She simply listened, nodded, and filled in her role, but I noticed how much work she actually did quietly, without asking for credit. That night, as she flipped through the event binder, I caught myself watching her. There was something calm about the way she worked. Focused, patient, steady. I realized I hadn't seen those qualities in many people, and definitely not in the women I used to date. She wasn't trying to impress anyone. She wasn't doing any of this for attention. She was simply doing what she had agreed to do, and doing it well. She looked up and noticed me staring. "What?" she asked. I hesitated, feeling something strange, an emotion I didn't recognize right away. It wasn't irritation or pride or amusement. It was something much deeper. I guess I didn't realize how strong you were," I said quietly. "You've been dealing with all of this. My family, their pressure, the expectations, and you've never once complained. Honestly, you've handled it better than I would have." For a moment, she didn't respond. Then she smiled. It was softer than any smile I'd seen from her before. Not the polite one she used with my parents or the careful one she used in public. This smile was real. "I'm not doing it for them," she said. "I'm doing it for me." That answer stayed with me. It was in that moment that something shifted inside me. My feelings had changed. What had begun as a silly plan, an act of rebellion, a fake relationship, a strategy to upset my parents, was no longer just a game. I had started to see Mary for who she really was. And the truth was, I admired her. I respected her strength, her honesty, and her ability to stay true to herself in a world that constantly tried to shape her into someone else. I hadn't expected this. I hadn't planned for it. But I couldn't ignore it anymore. I didn't just admire her. I wanted to be with her. For real. I took a deep breath and looked at her again. "Mary," I said, slowly but with meaning, "maybe it's time we told them the truth." She didn't look surprised. She just nodded, like she had already been thinking the same thing. She understood exactly what I meant. We weren't pretending anymore. We weren't two strangers pretending to be in love to upset our families. Something real had grown between us, something honest, and it was time to stop hiding it. The next day, we asked both sets of parents to meet with us. We wanted to talk, real talk, and explain everything. I expected it to be difficult, maybe even painful. I expected anger, confusion, disappointment, but strangely, I felt calm. I wasn't scared of what they might say. For once in my life, I wasn't doing something to get a reaction. I wasn't acting out or putting on a show. I was just doing what felt right. And with Mary by my side, I didn't feel like I had anything to prove anymore. As we sat across from our parents, ready to speak, I realized something even more important. I was finally ready to live life honestly, not just for myself, but for the future I wanted to build. And that future, it wasn't just about business or rebellion or breaking expectations. It was about Mary.